Hi, I wanted to address a few questions that students had asked to see if I can offer more support for the information that we discussed during our last seminar. So to that end, and forgive me, I'm going to look at my notes to what the questions were. The first one was, is it okay to use a dosha quiz or dosha test in order to be able to understand what your prakriti or your constitution is versus getting that information from an Ayurvedic practitioner or health counselor or Ayurvedic doctor? And the answer is it depends, of course. That's the answer, which means, it's hard for so many of us to really be objective about ourselves, right? I'll look in the mirror and I'm comparing myself against ideas in my mind. Are my eyes big or small? Do I have my eyes green or hazel or blue? Are my hands big or small? So, because of that, a dosha test or a dosha quiz you might do online or in a magazine or a book, it's not that that's wrong. It's that it can be challenging to see ourselves with objectivity. When an Ayurvedic practitioner or an Ayurvedic physician gives a consultation, they'll take your pulses. And for ladies, it's the left hand. Vata, Pitta, Kapha are the fingers. And there's a meditation on the pulse. It's not the radial pulse, it's the movement of the doshas, of the energy of the doshas. And because we're reading something beyond the superficial, we tend to think, and generally it is, more specific to dosha, prakriti, and constitution. However, if you have a really clear idea of who you are, meaning what your dosha, what your physical body is in relationship to others, are my bones small? Are my bones medium? Is my skin rough and dry? Is my skin tend to have a lot of water held in it? What's the quality of my hair? These are the characteristics we look at to understand dosha prakriti. Because remember, your dosha is your physical nature and your tendency. Your dosha prakriti, your constitution, whether you're vata dominant, pitta, or kapha dominant. If you're a dual dosha, vata pitta, pitta kapha, or vata kapha, or if you have a balance or a tridoshic constitution where vata, pitta, and kapha are in similar amounts in your physical body, that has very little to do with your psychology and the way your mind works mentally and psychologically with regard to your spiritual expression. That's your manas prakriti or your mind's constitution. So there's more than one constitution in Ayurveda. Your dosha constitution is your physical body and your tendency. So the answer is it depends. If you feel really confident that you can see yourself from a more objective point of view and say, are the size of my eyes small, medium, or large? Are my lips balanced, upper and lower lip about the same size? Is my upper lip larger? These are the kinds of questions on dosha quizzes. And if you can be somewhat subjective, then yes, you can absolutely understand your dosha prakriti, your constitutional nature. If you struggle with being objective about yourself, maybe a little too critical or don't have a lot of clarity about how you present in a continuum of other physical bodies, then I think it would be better for you to work with an Ayurvedic professional to have your pulses read to get a really clear idea of your constitution. Another part of this question, which wasn't asked, but I think is important to consider, that generally speaking in Ayurveda, we're not working with your constitution. We're working with what's called your vikruti. And the vikruti is your current state of imbalance. So yes, it's incredibly useful to know what your constitution is because it's what you can bring into your daily habits to keep yourself in good balance with that constitution, depending on the season of the year, your stage of life, hour of the day. But what we're generally treating in Ayurveda, when there's an imbalance in your prakriti, that is called your vikruti. And your vikruti is something that can be very challenging to self-diagnose because oftentimes if we've had a longer imbalance in a certain aspect of our doshas, we might think that's our nature, when in fact, that's actually a long-standing imbalance in our doshas. So, to clarify, yes, you can use a dosha test or quiz to better understand your nature or your constitution, prakriti, all the same thing, nature, constitution, prakriti. And it can be challenging for many people who can't be objective about themselves and their physical body, right? Because that's what we use really to understand your dosha prakriti and your tendency in life, your psychology, the way you think, the way you express your mind-body connection, the way you express your spiritual nature. That's your manas prakriti or your mind's nature. And that's different than your dosha prakriti. There's two separate constitutions. And then the third thing is you have a vikruti. All of us go in and out of balance, maybe different times of the day, different seasons of the year. It may be a physical way or maybe a psychological manner. Maybe there's some spiritual suffering. And we can be brought back into balance most often if it's not something chronic or terminal. And we can do that through our daily diet, our lifestyle, perhaps some herbs might be used, and certainly our movement of prana with asana and pranayama. So, dosha prakriti, manas prakriti, vikruti, three different things that oftentimes you can make an assessment on, but an Ayurvedic professional who can read your pulses can give you a more specific assessment of that.